our nation today, these signs have become a familiar sight in many of our buildings. What is the story behind them? What do they mean to you? This series, prepared by Louisiana State University, entitled Marked for Survival, refers directly to the system of shelter identification. This next episode relates to the concept underlying this nation's entire civil defense program. To help us in our review of this film, here is Mr. John Robinson of the Office of Civil Defense Staff College. John?
Fallout shelters marked for survival. A system of shelters. That's what we're about to view together. A simple explanation of the National Fallout Shelter Program. As we watch, you will become increasingly aware that the shelter system, designed for survival, requires the cooperation of all of us in every state and every community throughout the nation. Shelters with adequate protection must be located where they are needed, where the people are. The concept is to provide the best protection for the most people at the least cost. Though your federal government is actively engaged in identifying, marking, and stocking these shelters, full accomplishment is possible only when each community realizes and uses its own capabilities. In this portrayal, the community is fortunate in having a good civil defense director, dedicated and hardworking. There are many such men in this country. But note also that much of the success of the shelter program rests on individual citizens, the building owner or manager controlling property that might be used as a shelter, the individual who knows his community plan and understands where to go and what to do in an emergency. In your own community, you will discover that many means are being used to identify more shelter spaces. The National Fallout Shelter Survey is accompanied by a study of shelter in smaller structures, an analysis of home fallout protection, and community shelter planning efforts to make the best use of available protection and to tell you about it. To understand part of this nationwide story, then, let us watch this sequence called A System of Shelter.
All over the nation, in cities, in towns, everywhere people have grown accustomed to these signs. Many of us just take them for granted. People like you, like me, the people of Central City, pay little heed to the signs in our town. Let's say that you and I live in Central City. Let's say that precisely 10:15 on a given morning in early spring, the warning sounds. Central City population, 190,000, the seat of Central County, 50 miles southeast of the state capital. It is now 10:15 a.m. At first, no one seems to heed the sirens. There have been tests before, but never so insistent.
We interrupt this program for a nationwide alert. This is not a test. I repeat, this is a nationwide alert. The United States is under attack. Enemy missiles are on the way. All citizens must go to the nearest shelter immediately. I repeat, our nation is under attack. All citizens go to the nearest shelter immediately. This is the emergency broadcast system. Normal broadcasting has been discontinued.
Within minutes, the signs take on a new reality. And now, for the first time, most of us in Central City and throughout the nation follow the capacity of shelters.
Go to the basement in the main building up on the corner. You people go into the building behind you. Get in the shelters as quickly as possible. Take cover. Everybody on the street.
Most of us in Central City have never seen a shelter before. But these signs tell us where they are. And suddenly, you, I, and the people of Central City, and everyone in the nation are wasting no time getting into them. Yes, the shelters are there. But few of us know why or how they came into being, or the plans communities all over the country, like your town, Central City, have developed to maintain life in a system of shelters. Before we ever saw these signs back in 1961, more than 600 architectural and engineering firms were placed under federal government contracts. Members of these firms were then trained to find and identify shelter space in existing public and private buildings, which could be used to protect us in the event of nuclear attack.
There is space in your buildings right now. What we're trying
In our city, Dave Connors, Central City's Civil Defense Director, working in close cooperation with the survey teams, explained this mission to our property owners, helping the teams to gather pertinent data on local structures.
What about you, Henry? Do you have such a space?
Our filing room might be just what you're looking for. It's a large room without windows on the third floor of our building.
Mr. Wheeler, just how many floors in the building? You know it takes more than just a few to really give adequate protection.
There are 8 floors above the third.
In many meetings like this, not only did Connors help locate the owners of buildings for the teams, he made it much easier for them to identify each acceptable space and make cost estimates for essential improvements for those structures with enough protection against radioactivity, but substandard habitability and limited capacity. Connors and his staff not only helped the teams get started at meetings like these, but helped them to go here, there, and everywhere. Plans for every structure in Central City were made available. They searched public and private buildings, in the central core of the high-rise office buildings, in schools, hospitals, in short, wherever a potential shelter space might meet the requirements of the survey. So the Federal Survey found the shelter spaces. Now it was up to the state and local authorities to do something about it. Just as early in the survey, he was untiring in his efforts to make our city survey a success, he and his staff now spent weeks and months with landlords and building owners urging their cooperation.
After all, Mr. Kirk, it can do no harm. Let us mark and stock the shelters in your building. You know, one day it may be your shelter that saves your life. Oh, now, Dave, you know those shelters aren't going to protect us from that bomb. Well, you'd look mighty silly if we didn't have a direct gift. You were caught in a fallout without any shelter. Now let us stock and mark these buildings. Just sign this license. We won't inconvenience you. Well, I don't suppose it should harm anything.
Often, Dave met owners who had good reason for their reluctance.
Hey, I don't see how we did it. I've discussed this with my department, and we just don't feel as if we leave the guys.
Well, now look, Mr. Carter, if we are attacked, this space will be useless unless your customers and tenants survive. Now think just a moment. We only use these shelters in emergencies.
Well, I don't know.
No one will ever know how many of these signs went up simply because of Dave Connor's salesmanship. But despite all his efforts, Central City, like so many others, still suffered from a serious shortage of shelters. So Dave tirelessly spoke to the Property Owners Association and all the many civic and trade associations in town in a determined campaign to get more shelter spaces for an emergency few of us thought would ever come. Unfortunately, much of what he said fell upon deaf ears, or failed to convince most of us that there really was a threat. Until the Cuban crisis brought everyone a little closer to reality. Then people began to listen. The City Council allocated additional funds to Central City's defense effort. Many people built home shelters. Others enrolled for special civil defense courses as shelter managers, radiological monitors, rescue workers, firefighters, police reserves, and so on. The mayor and the city council authorized the construction of a new emergency operating center. More and more shelters were marked, stocked, and licensed. But with the passing of the Cuban crisis, many of us lost personal interest in civil defense, leaving our survival plans in the hands of a few faithful and responsible citizens, who ultimately proved to be our only hope to make our survival possible. About a year before the attack, Dave Connors, in his annual report to the mayor and city council, summed it up this way.
The federal survey shows some 110,000 shelter spaces could be provided in existing buildings within the city limits. However, 11,200 of these spaces can only be utilized if proper ventilation is effective. Now, until we can persuade the owners of these structures to make the necessary modifications, these spaces are not available. This leaves us with 100,000 potentially usable spaces. But before these spaces can be used, we must secure owners' consent to sign license, secure federal stocking, water containers, food and other supplies issued by the federal government, deliver them and install them in each shelter. Now this has been done in sufficient number to provide us with 64,000 usable shelter spaces in shelters accommodating 50 or more people per shelter. These are mostly in the downtown area. There are also 12,000 additional spaces in residential and suburban areas. That's including the homeowner shelters too. So that gives us a total of 76,000 usable shelters.
We have a population of 190,000.
Well, obviously there's not enough shelters to go around.
And another thing, 3/4 of these are downtown in the business district. Hardly anybody there after 6 p.m.
The best we can expect to do this year is add 8,000 spaces through new construction and modifications in existing buildings. We have a long way to go. Now, the way I see it, we should persuade these owners to...
Honest, get to the point. How much will it cost? Tell me where will we get the money?
Well, if you and the school board approve the proposed structural changes in the plans for the new Jefferson High School and the new municipal auditorium. An additional 1,800 spaces will be made available at a cost of less than $2 a space. But we still need more spaces. Now I have some new things to propose.
The problems here were similar to those faced by thousands of cities and towns throughout the nation. The figures might vary, but nationwide, there were not enough shelter spaces for all of us. Later on, Dave Connors tried to persuade the city council to build 5 new dual-purpose community shelters in areas where they were badly needed.
I'm not talking about drastically altering the original cost of these new schools, but these new plans do provide not only adequate shelter space, but badly needed peacetime community meeting rooms in other words.
We've got too many meetings now. That's beside the point. Let's hear Connors out, please.
Projects 4 and 5 provide more usable library space.
What's wrong with the old libraries? They have plenty of books now.
Fringe benefits to be derived from these dual shelters are better temperature control, better humidity control, more efficient noise levels, more shelf space. But the crux of the matter is it provides more, yes, a lot more, shelter space.
You know what our problem is? We're jerry-rigging. Putting up a crutch here, digging a hole there, all improvising. What the city needs is a practical overall plan for civil defense and emergency survival, including a progressive step-by-step plan for finding these shelters whenever and wherever we can. Not just pot-shotting every time Connors comes in with a pitch.
And let me tell you something, that's exactly what we're going to get.
A master emergency survival plan that will work.
To a great extent, that's the way it went in cities, towns, and villages all over the country. But there was progress. And as far as Central City was concerned, a master plan was drawn up in consultation with state and federal experts. A plan for utilizing in both the city and rural areas, not what they hoped to have, but what they did have, and what they could actually do. It included all kinds of emergency services. It included plans for industrial defense and making use of their facilities. It included plans for taking care of the rural areas adjacent to Central City. These areas were important, and they couldn't do very much on a community basis, nor would farmers be downtown near an office building corridor. Through the United States Department of Agriculture and county agents, the farmers were shown how to build or adapt existing structures for shelters for themselves and their farmhands, as well as to provide protection for their livestock. In rural areas, the 4-H clubs, the Grange, and other groups were recruited by Jerry Bikel, the county agent acting in close cooperation with experts from federal, state, and local agencies. Through Bikel's efforts, hundreds of farmers and their families were brought together all over the central county and taught the basic facts of rural civil defense. These farmers learned to utilize fodder, such as hay and sacks of grain, or earth, to help shield their livestock against radiation. How to properly protect their families by using existing shelter space found in root cellars, storm cellars, or in newly constructed shelters. Classes in radiological monitoring were conducted throughout the county, and Bikel persuaded most of the farmers to take these courses. This work in the field was only one part of the plan, and as things developed, officials came to grips with the enormous scope of overall planning for disaster. They had to plan for continuation and restoration of essential services: water, electricity, communications, for the securing and distribution of food, for post-attack housing, transportation, health, welfare, decontamination, police, firefighting, and rescue. And always there was the key problem of getting space, shelter space for everyone at every time of day. With the help of state and federal civil defense officials, additional funds and training materials were made available for training Central City citizens. Meetings were held. Meetings with heads of industrial plants, with engineers, with utilities representatives, and with key men in every city department. The plan for emergency took shape. But men like Connors never forgot the one basic need, shelter. Working closely with builders, architects, and engineers, Dave and other city officials made full use of the technique called slanting.
Each plan calls for rotating stock storage in this area, only there's no room there for personnel protection. Seems to me that the whole point is...
Gentlemen, by planning, we do not mean to suggest unrealistic and costly changes in your building plan. This booklet clearly shows built-in protection factors can very often be greatly increased by such simple changes in your building plans as relocating a door, or moving a wall, or pouring extra cement on a portion of your roof. But what we do ask is that you give serious consideration to the need for providing as much adequate fallout protection as possible in your building plans.
Management often took the lead in modifying their plants so as to provide additional shelter space for the public as well as their own employees. More private businesses, such as garages and warehouses, began to cooperate. Dave and his staff persuaded many homeowners to activate community-wide home shelter building projects in areas where shelters were desperately needed. Most of these shelters were like the Hamiltons and were well equipped, stocked, and very practical. In March of 1965, the Office of Civil Defense with the Census Bureau took the first steps to find out what potential shelter space might be found in the basements and interiors of private dwellings, or what existing space could be improved or modified to provide adequate shelter there. While the development of space went on, all the other elements contributing to making shelters usable were rolling too. Central City civil defense personnel persuaded many of us to enroll for special courses in medical self-help, radiation monitoring, shelter management, and other vitally important classes. Through a community-wide program of voluntary donations of food, clothing, and equipment to supplement basic government supplies, many shelters were gradually better prepared for the attack no one thought would ever happen. Blankets, medical supplies, a goodly number of old surplus army cots, transistor radios with new batteries to operate them, paper cups, games, and other recreation equipment were placed in bins all over the city. Thanks to this program, we were able to provide badly needed additional supplies for thousands without outside help. Now, Central City has grown accustomed to these signs. Yet, even though most of us took them for granted, they were symbols of more than a system of shelters. They were the indication that our town had a plan. So too did other cities and towns. But there were still thousands of communities throughout the nation without any plan. Yes, Central City had a plan. It was far from perfect, but it existed and was limited only to what we had to work with. Then, at 10:15 on that early spring morning population, 190,000, the seat of Central County, 50 miles southeast of the state capital. It is now 10:15 a.m. At first, no one seems to heed the sirens. There have been tests before, but never so insistent.
For a nationwide alert. This is not a test. I repeat, this is a nationwide alert. The United States is under attack. Enemy missiles are on the way. All citizens must go to the nearest shelter immediately. I repeat, our nation is under attack. All citizens go to the nearest shelter immediately. This is the emergency broadcast system. Normal broadcasting has been discontinued.